You want knowledge, I want knowledge, means a Thursday for knowledge. And this week I spoke to Greg Manning. Most of his adult life, in one way or another, has been dedicated to learning the art or performing ceremony. I wanted to talk to him about a man's need for ceremony. It's something that I have certainly started to use a lot in my life. And I never used to. I always rejected ceremony because to me they meant religion. And it's something I've connected with. We also talked about the difference between ceremony and ritual. And we talked about a whole host of other ways that you can bring this stuff into your life. So if you're interested in ceremony, this is one for you. Take care. Peace. Everything is ceremony in the wild garden of childhood. Pablo Neruda. Everyone who's watching this, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching this week's Thursday for Knowledge. If you're watching this in the Facebook group, you'll know that you can get involved by leaving any questions you have in the comments section. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel later on, why not join the Magnificent Man Project Facebook group? And then you can join in live. So this week I'm here with an old friend of mine, Greg Manning, and we're going to be talking about man's need for ceremony. So ceremony is really important in my life, and it's become very important in my life. It wasn't always. So it's great to have you here, Greg. Thanks for that. Thanks for taking the time. What I'd like to do is just allow you to introduce yourself, because you're going to do a much better version of it than I can do. So over to you.
Thanks, Lawrence. Really a pleasure to be here. Loving what you're doing here with the Magnificent Man Project. And yeah, it's always funny to try and sum up oneself, and I'll try and do my best. Really what happened with me in my younger years is that when my parents split up, I went into total self-sabotage, and I decided I wasn't going to be affected by this. So I shut down feeling anything at all, and went from a young age into being pretty much quite a big mess. And in the process of recovering from that, I discovered all sorts of different things, because I surround myself by different self-help ways of becoming functional again, because I need them more than anybody else. And I find this also with lots of people, that they teach what they need to learn. And so I surround myself with it, because I fall off track very easily. And I need something to enhance what is actually in some ways quite a weak will, addictive personality, somebody who can fall off and go off track quite easily. And throughout this time, I went through a period of setting myself strong intentions or weak intentions, or wishing that I was different whimsically, to finding different ways of things that worked for me to try and bring me back from being in all sorts of different spaces. One of the most tangible things was addictions. Fortunately, not any of the heroin or crack drugs, which can be really deep rabbit holes, but all sorts of other things, and just an addictive personality, really. And actually, there's a couple of things that came back in. Something that meaning actually really helped me go into a deeper sense of ability to be able to change myself, and but also added a whole color into life when life had a deeper meaning to it. And I suppose that spiritual aspect of it also came in, and I was so impressed by it that it has become my foremost way of going about helping myself and helping others now. So.
Great. Well, before we came on, we were having a little talk, and you came up with a very clear definition between the difference between ritual and ceremony,
Mm.
and I thought that might be a good way for us to start. Really. What's the difference between, so what is ceremony really, and how is it different from ritual?
Okay, so I'll try for me, and I don't know if there's a formal way, but ritual is almost like a habit that you do every day, and so even brushing your teeth might be ritual in some way. It's something that one does at a certain time for a certain purpose to achieve a certain outcome, and it's almost, it can be much more individual in its way. In some way, ritual can be ceremonial, and in some way, ceremony can be ritual. And I remember once one of my teachers saying that if you can brush your teeth every day, then you can do anything. And which was a bit disappointing for me because actually I struggle with actually remembering to brush my teeth every day. But that's a classic ritual of daily things to do, and it can be done quite often. There are aspects of it that are the same every time, and it gives us an anchoring and a grounding and it creates deep grooves in this way. It's a way of creating habit and change. Ceremony is something really that for me is tends to be more social. Social in some ways, meaning that it's done together, but often non-social in a communication way. It's not recreational or social. Quite often it's very focused and committed, and it's intentional in its way. So coming in with a purpose for doing something. And traditionally, you would create a set and a setting for this. So a mindset might be part of that intentionality. And the setting may be that you light a candle and you turn down the lights and you put some flowers on an altar, um, and you say some specific words to begin with. And you create a beginning and end and a middle phase during which you meet your intention. You create something that holds and enhances what you want to do in your life. So really, that's how I see the difference really between the two.
I've kind of become interested in ceremony, and I think this is the reason why I kind of invited you on. Really, is ceremony has become important to me, whereas it never was before. You know, ceremony, I always thought of ceremonies as kind of like, um, either kind of a religious thing or a bit of a sort of new age hippie thing. Whenever I thought of them, and we know each other through the Mankind Project, and one of the things that like I really loved about the Mankind Project, and I wouldn't call like the weekend like a ceremony or anything. It's like much more sprawling than that, but like, and all encompassing. But like, what I liked about it was it felt like a line in the sand. It felt like a part of this who I was at this time is over, and I'm stepping into something new. I'm stepping into a newer version of me, and it did feel like a threshold in that way. And one of the things that I've really come to enjoy by like being involved in various different things now that do have a ceremonial aspect, or just turning up at a men's group, for example, which has a ceremonial aspect at the beginning, is that what it definitely does is says, right, you're entering into a different space now. There's a different thing happening here. And where my interest around that has sort of gone is by looking at even the sort of ceremonies that we see as very commonplace, like a funeral, which is really just a death grief ceremony. in any ways, no matter how normal it feels to us in the West, as that's what a funeral looks like. It's a ceremony, and it's a thing, and you know, that has a very clear role of like this ceremony is about taking that person and taking them from your mind, as in, you know, the loss of this person who is real, and putting them into this symbolic, in a way, like now they're in the symbolic realm of someone who used to be here. You know, it's the idea of a person. And so clearly we kind of have so many ceremonies for so many reasons. Why? You know, why is ceremony so important to us as men, as human beings?
I see ceremony as being a way of using lots of different tools. You hear these terms, you may have heard of these terms: holding space, the idea of creating space as well in and amongst that. And when we change the conditions around us, um, external environment, then we change our internal environment. And what might take a long time in a suboptimal environment may be able to be done quite quickly in an optimal environment. So when we have different ceremonies for different things, it may be that some people find it very difficult to connect to their grief in everyday world, because maybe they feel like they need to be strong for other people, or they feel too vulnerable to go into that space, like they might be picked on. And whereas something like the permission slip of a funeral may be like, okay, this is where people are allowed to feel grief. But it may be that part of that might be bringing up the memories of everything, and also being able to see the body that's there, and certain music that helps us to connect to something that is difficult to connect to in a different way. And in the same with a wedding, you know, to be able to create something where it's so much effort has been put into, so there are so many people witnessing this promise that's been made. It's alchemy. And that in that moment, we use this in the Mankind Project. It's the alchemy of shame, really. And shame, the positive um, uh, expression of shame, the purpose of shame, this energy, this beautiful energy that comes to us. The purpose of it is to create a strong ethical structure to it. And so in this moment where you make a promise to be with somebody, and you make all of these promises, there's so many people listening that when you come to the temptation of breaking that, then it's more difficult, because you realize that you will seem out of integrity to all of these other people who are in this space. And so it's stronger. We're adding strength to the alchemy of whatever our intention was. Um, Often with my work, it's about self-healing. So people can come with different intentions to the work where they come into a ceremony. They can bring whatever it is that they want. And then we create a shamanic medium, which is, it's like creating an altered state of consciousness in some way. And in that altered state of consciousness, it may be using the alpha brain wave state, which is the dream state, which is what happens when you go into a shamanic journey, when you're playing a drum, or different ways of creating this state where we're more able to access our subconscious. This is when we're trying to reprogram ourselves, which can be quite difficult. This is a much more effective way of going in. So really, that's the space that we create within it, and it's a catalyst in some ways.
Yeah, it's interesting because like ceremony, like there was so much around ceremony that I found difficult, you know, because of my background, because of my upbringing. I'm a very kind of grew up in East London, like urban city kid, like, you know, and lots of ceremonial stuff I've been involved with, like you mentioned, drumming, stuff like that. Like I was dragged kicking and screaming to that stuff. You know, it was like, I was like, who let the white people near the drums? Like, I'm not getting involved with this. But like, you know, once I got past myself, I realized actually just how connecting, you know, that those aspects of like, you know, the stuff that's used in ceremony, like sound, like participation in drumming, like smells, you know, the burning of certain things to kind of to anchor me into a different sort of space, just how valuable that is. So I guess I'm sort of saying, like, what are the elements of ceremony? Like, what's the elements?
I actually teach this, go into how to create and hold sacred ceremonial space, and there's a lot. We can spend days and days on each of these elements. Um, uh, and so I mentioned some of them. There is really one of my teachers actually, and I've had various teachers, but one of my shaman teachers, he would spend quite a lot of time, most of his time, talking about the energy that you're holding as a space holder, what you stand for, and what you uh, are, in the way that you present yourself. And there is a certain amount of that which specifically comes out of our work. One of the things I love about the Mankind Project is this idea of being self-aware and this compassion, which comes from personal awareness of our own shadow, and as we see ourselves as human and fabulously fucked up, fallible beings, that we also, by accepting ourselves, we learn to accept others. And so there's a personal energy that is held and that has a sexual element as well, to be able to create really strong boundaries and non-judgmental space. That is distinctly one of them. um, then there is preparation and integration are the words we would use. So allowing people to have some time to think about what it is that their intention is, and to be able to spend some time with that. And you can enhance this with, asking questions, or all of the preparation that goes into weddings and funerals is all there. There's an element of this, um, being able to prepare and integrate means leaving some time and space to integration is taking what you've received and making it uh, actually valuable, and making the changes have an effect in your life, giving them the space in order to take effect and take hold. So these two, and then closer into the center, there's the opening and the closing, and the words that are said. And this is where the magician comes in very strong in this way. We weave some magic for this spell that's going to happen, um, and then there's all sorts, everything from light is huge, music, all of the sounds, the quietness, the contemplation time, the timing generally of things, letting people, weaving the magic so people have time to consider, creating the space that people can access a different space in themselves. And that might be for feeling, it may be for thinking or contemplating or creating. And smells can definitely play a big part in that, for sure. Um, but quite a lot of it for me, especially in the West, it's different culturally. In the West, quite a lot of the way we interpret the world is mentally. And so you'll see ceremonies happening in different ways in different places. Um, and for us, creating um, the web of words can have a big effect on this.
Mm.
And it's really a magician's thing to create and hold that space, to be able to guide people in a way that's accessible for everybody, that people can relate to and understand. And part of the holding of that ceremony does involve is enhanced by understanding who is coming and who they are and how they are, what they're bringing to it, and adapting the words so that it's specific to the people who are coming, individualizing it as well in some ways.
Okay, so you mentioned that you do work teaching this kind of stuff, how to create a whole ceremonial space. What are some of the other things you do? What's some of the ceremonial work that you're involved in?
So, well, on the course, people can use any shamanic medium for it, and so I use different shamanic mediums for the same purpose. People come and experience all sorts of different things. One of the things I work with, for instance, is a frog medicine from the jungle called Kambô. It's a giant monkey tree frog, which when scared, it gives off the secretion, which is scraped onto sticks. We re-moisturize it and apply it to the lymph and various different parts of the body, and it makes you purge, it makes you sick. It takes about half an hour-ish. And there is that half an hour is padded out because it's a lot more effective by it's a total of about 5 hours for time to talk, to prepare, to integrate. Meditation's a part of that, smells, smudging, all sorts of different aspects of it, prayer, tuning people in, opening up in this way. And it's famous for enhancing the immune system, cleansing, but in the jungle they have an energetic medicine, they call it panema, so it clears blockages physically and mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and I've seen lots of healing from it. That's one of the main things that I do. I work with other different plants, so cacao is one, wayusa, different things that have a subtle, a range of effects, from very strong and powerful to subtle effects in ceremonies that last from anywhere. Some of our retreats at the moment, we've got one in July that's 8 days. Some of them are 5 hours. Another shamanic medium that I'm very fond of is the darkness, and I teach a breath technique. So breath can be used to enter incredible altered states of consciousness, and really profoundly otherworldly states of consciousness. So I teach a method called rebirthing over the course of 3 days, and then I take people into the water to experience water rebirthing for the last 2 days. So we spend 5.5 days in total absolute pitch black, and you can measure in the darkness the brain chemistry changes. So serotonin is restricted, melatonin is enhanced, so you go into a dreamy state, and then through that the melatonin turns into pinolin and eventually into DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, which is stored in the pineal gland, related to dreaming, but is also quite well known as a strong, powerful psychedelic. So people start to get visions just from the darkness after a little while, and they go deep into it along with the breath. And people have sometimes profound hallucinogenic experiences of being in the womb or being born, or listening to conversations people were having outside the womb whilst they were in the womb, and all sorts of other different things that would blow people's minds if they were to listen to the conversations that we have in that dream state. These are some of the things that I work with, and but I teach how to use all of these different things. Sometimes drumming, sometimes movement, sometimes dance. There are so many different shamanic, what I would call shamanic mediums, ways of entering into these altered states that are out there. And I just have a few of my favorites that I work with.
It's funny because when I get involved in conversations like this, it reminds me of, and trust me where I'm going with this, it reminds me of a Billy Connolly stand-up sketch, which I watched once, where he was talking about how he'd been a welder, and suddenly he became really, really rich. And he remembers once being in a carpet shop and looking at a rug and saying, "How much is that rug?" And they were like £20,000. And in him, the welder was going, "What are you talking about, man? Like it's a rug, you know." And like I get those. I get, as William Burroughs would call them, like naked lunch moments. Like I often get these things where like I'm having a conversation like this, and um, because of the sort of journey that I've been on over the last couple of decades, like for me to hear like shamanism and psychedelics and rebirthing and breath work and all that sort comes completely natural to me. So, oh yeah, like we're just talking about that. But like what it brings my awareness to is there might be people who are watching this who go, what? Like what are you guys on? Like what are you guys talking about? Like it's what shamanism, what all that you're talking about. But like there seems to be a softening around all of that. I think it seems to me, and maybe it's just I'm in some sort of echo chamber, but it seems to me even when I look on TV and like or read the paper or something, it seems like there is a growing acceptance of more of this stuff. It's not so on the fringes as it once used to be. Is that your experience also?
For sure. I think that people are learning to translate, and so in shamanic language, we talk about soul fragmentation and soul retrieval, and you bang your drum and you connect to um, your spirit phoenix who would go and retrieve this soul fragment from another land and come and reintegrate it into your being, and you'd come out and somehow in a psychological language that may be that you might have something happened to you that happened when you were young, and maybe you got affected by it in such a way that anytime anything around you reminds you of that, that you become distracted and lack of presence in this space, and it affects your ability to be able to enjoy life in the fullness. And so you might go into a regression to go back to that place and to re-experience it, re-understand it with an adult mind, and integrate what we in which way this part of our shadow. And so when people are for me, this shamanic language, it's very individual, and I'm around it a lot, and people's language of life gets mixed up with it, but I can see through it. And I think that as we become less shamed and more accepting of ourselves and other people around us, that we're open to being able to feel into what people are trying to say, as opposed to taking it literally. In this way. And I see it a lot. I think there is an opening, and I think that there's a lot. I think for me, it's this indoctrination into science, which I see as a church in some ways. It has dogma, and it has where things are unquestionably true, and I think that actually the more people look into it, the quantum side of it, the wacky side of science, where it's really random and there's all sorts of weird and wonderful things that we don't understand, the observer being connected to the observed and everything else. I think that everything that we can't measure or touch is imagination, and this can be really limiting for us, and we're shamed into that. Oh, he believes in, even now in shaming people who believe in God. Oh, you're talking to the your fairy godmother, are you? As my mother would say to me, you can spend lots of time talking to your fairy godmother. Like, meanwhile, the real world continues, and yet. Um, I think that in time, this idea of intuition and guidance of things outside, it's a very personal language. And people are understand that they have these experiences too, these things that are unexplainable. That even if it's their dreams, they come out going, "That was weird," but it happened. It seemed so real at the time. And does it have a meaning? Could it have a meaning? And I think that I think there is a movement towards the acceptance that things in our life that happen don't happen by accident, and that some things do have a deeper meaning, whether we like to think about it or not. I think that that's happening. I see a change. But then I'm in a self-perpetuating little bubble, and I'm more surrounded by people like me as I go on. So who knows? I might just be disconnected from it.
Yeah, one day we'll go. Oh, we've ended up here if we were complete outsiders.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing because I know, like, I think that, like, one of the biggest changes I've seen within the last, say, 10 years is the sort of wider spread acceptance of kind of plant medicine, or as scientists would say, like psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and it's an interesting thing because it's almost like a return, isn't it? Because like in the 40s and 50s and early 60s, like it was fine. It was seen as valid psychedelic research. This is what we're doing. This is the next thing, like this is an amazing thing. And then bang comes Timothy Leary and the Merry Pranksters, and they say, no, let's have a load of fun with it, and bang, and suddenly it's locked away.
Yeah.
No one can touch it, and for a long time, for all of that time, there was a massive load of underground kind of practitioners who were going, there's something here, there's something in this. And now this is kind of coming around, and people go, and now the real science is going, yes, there is something in it, and I wonder if that's a symptom of this sort of societal shift of us going, maybe we don't know it all. Maybe there is something in the bits we don't understand. And I see ceremony, and I really like the definition you used of kind of spirit there, as kind of it's anything that can't really be measured.
Yeah,
it's almost like, in that terms, like friendship is a spiritual thing, because you can't weigh it, and you can't, but we know it's there.
Yeah.
And so, that thing between how ceremony can kind of open us up to those things that we know are there, but somehow we can't measure them or put them in a test tube. And I find that really interesting in my own journey, because I was like hardcore. I always described myself as like a militant atheist. That's what I was. I was like, listen, none of that exists. Anything you think of, that's a trick of the mind. It's like we make this. We are just. I can't remember who described humans as a 4-pound meat computer. But that was kind of how I saw us. Like that was the brain, a meat computer. But I've sort of softened in that. And I think a lot of that was letting go of my own arrogance and ignorance, and kind of coming to a place in myself where I could go, my brain ain't big enough to work out what is going on in the universe. And it's kind of arrogant for me to think I could even understand it. Like, I find it amazing to believe that, if there is a God, or if there is some sort of God, that we would even be able to perceive it with our minds. It would be so obscure and complex that I'm sure our minds couldn't cope with it. But then on the other side, sometimes I'm in the mind where I'm like, no, it's the cruelest trick that's ever been played. You get a monkey and you give it the brain the size of a universe, and you've now got the biggest problem solving machine, but all you really need to do is mate and eat. So now you've got to torment yourself for the rest of your life with this complicated abacus of numbers you don't need. And so whether there is spirit or whether it is just that, there must be value in, whether we look at it as psychology or magic, however we look at it, however we translate it, to use what you're saying, the role of ceremony is to kind of anchor us in some way so that we can look at these things, and that has to be valuable. It has to be valuable.
I For me, it is particularly valuable because of my magician, and trying to solve the problems of the magician using the magician never works. It's like trying to solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it. Is the phrase how it goes. And it's an interesting thing because I've had lots of psychedelic use, and some of it recreational and some of it ceremonial, and the ceremony is an enhancer in and of itself. So, and then the psychedelics on top of it, and it's a tool at the end of the day, and nothing is necessarily medicinal. Um, water can be medicinal if you're dehydrated, or it can kill you if you're too much. So, depending on how the tool is used, psychedelics can be incredible with the right support. And I've seen many people lives very tangibly change. When people have this idea that something's changed, they have an experience where nothing really changes, or try lots of different techniques. And then they come to something like psychedelics or any of these shamanic mediums, but quite often with the famous medicinal shamanic medicines like ayahuasca or San Pedro or peyote. Iboga is another big one. When you can see this person is not the same person as they were before, and always invariably better, with very few rare exceptions. And that generally boils down to the setting and the set, how you go into this and how it's held.
And that set and setting, I mean, in a way, that's another way of saying ceremony, isn't it? Like the set.
Set is mindset, setting is the ceremony. But part of the ceremony done well by the people who are creating it will help tune people into the right mindset, and also exclude people who aren't in the right mindset to be able to go into what is, sometimes you don't want a catalyst if things are heading the wrong direction already. In a strong way, you may want to manage that first, so at least the vehicle's pointing in the direction before you give it a big shove. There's so much to be said for psychedelics, and I think there's a lot to be said for how they can be used in a quite coercive way. It's strong. Some people don't need something that strong. Some people can do it very simply, but for those who need a bit more coercive techniques, then they can be really amazing.
Yeah, because I guess that's the like the danger with anything, because I'm not sure if danger is the right word, but the danger of anything becoming more mainstream is that I guess you can have more people around something who are not necessarily interested in it for the right reasons, for example, do just think, actually, I'll just try this out. But also it can somehow prove a sort of sleight of hand, which takes away from everything else. It's like, this is it now in terms of ceremony. Whereas we know there's tons of other different things that people can do, and other ways that people can get involved in ceremony. What do you think's the damage by not having ceremony? Like, what would I mean, it's a bit of an obscure question because they're so slight, aren't they, ceremonies? Like, it's kind of, there's so many and they're so ingrained. But I guess what I'm getting to is, like, I see our quest for ceremony almost alongside our quest for meaning.
Yeah.
It's a quest for making something special.
Yeah.
And what
punctuating, I see it as a life punctuating. I mean, the way we met is through an initiation for men to come from boys into men in some ways, and that is, I think, the most obvious example of societal a loss of ceremony that has had a huge impact, because there is a transitional element to it. It's an alchemy. It's so allowing yourself this punctuation to take a moment to acknowledge what was and to prepare for what is coming. And that's what happens with the guidance of people who've been through this transition. And I think that there's a massive impact that without that transition from boys to men, you end up with a lot of boys doing men's jobs and boys with men's responsibility, and myself was one of those. There's no judgment there. I was one of those too, and that's huge. So without this ritual and ceremony, that we also, as a community, miss out on that element, that these things, the traditions, the held, the teachings of the elders, the wisdom that could be contained in a very simple set of words and actions, that encapsulate the shared meaning of life as it is, the cultural significance of this meaning. And this is really a big thing, coming back to what you were saying about this, what is it to be human, and we're just meat machines, and that is part of the scientific paradigm, which I think that we will have to look at sooner than we think when the transhumanist thing comes to us. And what is it that we value? What is it that makes us human? What is it that makes us British? What is it that makes us men? What is it that makes us who we are in that way? And I think that's important. And we have there's the danger of losing sight of that. And I think it's so valuable that I am part of this movement, really to mark its significance, so we can maintain and acknowledge and honour what that is in this society, I believe.
And I guess like making it current, whatever beliefs we hold around kind of the global pandemic and all that stuff that's kind of going on, I think one of the things that it definitely showed us was, well, one, how damaging lack of ceremony is. Because if you look at the effect it had on people who they couldn't have funerals, for example, for people, there's a lot of people now who are saying, like, actually, like, my grandmother died or my mother died, I hadn't seen her for 6 months, I couldn't go to the funeral. We watched it on a screen,
couldn't process it.
We couldn't process it. So how we're seeing the very real effect of when we don't have even those very standard societal ceremonies that are used. But I also think, in a way, it's sort of, for me anyway, and I definitely know from other people that I've spoken to, so I'll take it as quite common, is that it also showed us the bits in our life that are important to us, in not that sort of just meat machine kind of way. Like, suddenly we kind of was in a way, we were in the capitalist dream of, like, right, you can sit at your cubic. For a lot of people, I mean, that's I recognize that was a very privileged position for me. There was a lot of people who weren't in that position, but I found myself in a position where, right, I'm at home, I have a computer, I don't have to go out, I can do all this stuff, I can order everything online, it can come to my house. It was almost like a sort of techno utopia for a moment, until very quickly it was like, this is a dystopia. This is terrible. I can't go to the shop and speak to the person in the shop. I don't have the ceremony of going shopping, for example. I don't have the ceremony of going to the bookshop and selecting the book I want. And I don't have the ceremony of meeting my friends on a Friday after work. I don't have the ceremony. And so suddenly it was like, it threw up the importance of those things that keep us human, those intangible things that are so ingrained in the human experience, and that really are kind of little ceremonies. They're like micro ceremonies in a way that I think, for me, definitely keep me sane. Like, I had to make up new ones, like I'm going to go for 5 or something. I guess that's more a ritual from your day. But
I think many of the things you mentioned were ritual, and there's definitely a social and human aspect. And funnily enough, and this is something that happened maybe on a weekend with the MKP, is you may not have even spoken to one of the other men on it, and yet you come out feeling closer to that person than maybe some of the people that you've known since you were a child. And there is so much that happens in collective in this collective ceremony, in even just sharing silence, in sharing contemplation, and in sharing vulnerability and openness, and in this way. That's very real. You know, you talk about being from the East End, keep it real, bruv. You know, like they talk about keeping things real. And in many ways, when we meet down the pub, the heart closes, the tongue flaps, and we're not actually connected at all. We think we're doing these things so we can get more connected, and yet, and quite often within that idea of mocking people who are connected to their inner language and inner communication and their imagination or their guidance or their dreams or something that's happened in their inner world from a space of vulnerability, that we can be more connected. It's really interesting socially.
It is really interesting. I mean, it's something that definitely I've noticed in I've definitely noticed in men, and the reason I've noticed it in men is because most of the work I do is around men. I'm not saying it's specific to men. I notice it because that's what I'm around. But like in terms of, you know, stuff like the Mankind Project weekends and the Mankind Project men's groups and all those sort of things that we're involved in. I find it quite interesting that sometimes you'll get a group of men beforehand who are very sort of keeping it real in that kind of way. But like, there's almost a sort of, I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for this. And I find that in other rituals that I've been involved in, where you kind of, on paper, that part of me from East London would go, what are you doing? You know, what on earth are you thinking that that's going to achieve? How did you end up here? You know, but there's a part of me, a deeper part of me, that's going, I've wanted this all along. This is right. And I think it's such a sort of part of, I think that thing of that loosening of where we are as a society is also a part of reevaluating things that we may have had before but let go of, that we're now realizing actually that was really important. We done that for those reasons, and we got so caught up in our own brilliance as a society that we were like, we've got all the answers now, we don't need any of that that weird stuff that we've done for the last 10,000 years. And actually now I think we're realizing that we do. And whenever I partake in something like that, you know, some kind of ceremony that's like that, there's a bit of me that goes, that's weird. And there's a bit of me that goes, you're always supposed to be doing this. Like this is home in some ways. This is what we always have done. And we need to bring more of it back. So I'm really grateful for the work that you do around it, and really grateful that you come here today to kind of talk to us about it. I'm going to bring it to a close now because of time. We've rapidly gone on, but I find that's always the ways with these conversations. You get interesting people together and you'll have an interesting conversation. Time flies. But I always end with the same questions. So I'm going to ask you these same questions, and I'm glad to know that you didn't do any looping and now you don't know what they are, which is good. So the last one is the first one is an obvious one. So how can people get in contact with you and keep up to date with what you're doing?
Okay, so I tend to be the explanation for most of the work that I do is on my website, which is sacredtree.co. No UK, just .co, Sacred Tree, with the branches that spread out into all sorts of different things. And that talks about my Kambô, my one-to-one stuff, the courses I teach, the darkness and everything else like that. I tend to have several events out throughout the year, and I have different ways of keeping people up to date with that. There's links through the website to things like Facebook pages where my events are. But if you're interested, there's all sorts of different ways through the website to get into contact with me, and that's the best way for this work. And I'm also very approachable, so email me, and I'm very happy to talk to people about the work that I do. And I get all sorts of people just inquiring about different medicine work and things that they feel uncomfortable with, or all sorts of different things like that. And I'm happy to talk share as much as I know.
Great. Second question. What question didn't I ask that you wish I had?
That's a good question. So
yeah, I'm very proud of that question.
It's a stumper. I think you asked some really good questions, and I suppose one of them, I maybe to look at the shadow side of it. What's the risk? What maybe can people? Where can people go wrong with it? And I think there is a certain element, and especially coming back to this psychedelic use, there were things that happened that did send people in all sorts of weird directions. And it would be true to say that the more intense the work that you do, quite often the deeper. It's like drilling, it's like diving. The higher the diving board that you dive off, the deeper you're going to dive into the water. And it's always good to dip your, make sure you know how deep it is before you go in, and start on the lower diving boards and work your way up. And there is some work that's very deep, and you may end up getting more than you bargained for, which is actually okay if it's held in a way with people who can hold it. The Mankind Project is an amazing example of very deep work that is absolutely, totally safe to do, because the men there are extremely experienced and able to hold whatever comes up, and there's medical, everything is there. So making sure you know what you're doing and with whom before you go very deep diving is a good one.
Glad I thought to ask that question. So if you could, third question of 4, if you could go back and meet yourself as a teenager, what advice would you give yourself, knowing that you probably wouldn't listen to it?
Probably wouldn't, no. I think that for me, scarcity was a big thing, and I still have it. There isn't enough time, and so I have to do everything now. And this actually comes from a fear that came from the womb, being turned in the womb. This hand that's going to come out of nowhere at any point and get me. And it was a significant part of my life, and it's in my shadow. And just to say, play the long game. I think that would be that. And I think that this is true because even the long game is not just the end of this life. I know that experientially now. I know that this is just part of a bigger picture. And what I do here and now, it doesn't have to be complete in this lifetime. It can be part of a bigger journey.
Wow. Okay, thank you. Final question. What book has had the most influence on your life?
I think, and it was a long time ago I read it, but Cosmic Trigger by Robert Anton Wilson, I think changed a lot for me. It was my cosmic trigger really early on. And I really like all that's in there. It's not necessarily really that connected to the work that I do now, but it helped me think outside the box in a discerning way, without attachment to whether what was curious about life was real or not. And I learnt that belief is the death of intelligence, in some way, to keep an open mind and yet have the courage to explore possibility. It's a beautiful thing.
That's a really, really obscure and great book to mention. I love that book. I loved that book when I first read it also. It's a great book. Greg, thank you so much for coming.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for doing the work that you do and bringing people on. And I will share this as well, which will be great. I'll put this out there.
And we'll make sure that all the links are also put in the sort of data for when this ends up on the page and on the Facebook and on the YouTube. So thank you, Greg. Everyone who's watching this, whether you are watching it in the Magnificent Man Project group or whether you are watching it on the YouTube site, if you are watching it in the group, great. Remember, we do these every Thursday, help us free. If you're watching it on the YouTube channel, then I suggest you go and join the Magnificent Man Project group so that you can get involved in these live. And if you are watching it on the YouTube channel for the first time, please subscribe and hit the bell so you get notifications. Thank you very much. It's Thursday. It's Thursday for knowledge. My lovely little pun. Thank you all for coming. See you later, Greg. See you later.
Lawrence, thanks.
Mm-hmm.